Hello everyone, this is the Metaphysical Mikto Griffin Red, and the name of this video will be called So-Called Racial Pride, Part 1. In this video, I'll be discussing how, especially when you have so-called black and white Caucasians or whatever, they come with this race pride shit, and pretty much I'm just going to go and delve into why I think it's it's really futile to talk about racial pride or whatever, because you had nothing to do with it. You just so happen to be born into this so-called phenotype or whatever. If you're going to be proud of anything, be proud of your accomplishments that you did in life. And if you notice that most pro-blacks or white power, white nationalists, or Klans members or whatever, they really don't have shit going for themselves in their lives. So the one thing that makes them feel good, to make the other people around them feel inferior or whatever, is racial pride. Now I'm going to be reading an article that I found. It's called My Race Problem by Randall Kennedy. It was written in May of 1997. So sit tight. I'm going to read this article to you, and some comments that I found on YouTube, which I found very enlightening, which I'll be sharing with you guys in this video. It says, My Race Problem by Randall Kennedy, May 1997. A consideration of touchy matters, racial pride, racial solidarity, and racial loyalty rarely discussed. What is the proper role of determining how I, an American black, should feel towards others? One response is that although I should not dislike people because of their race, there is nothing wrong with having a racial affection for other black people. Indeed, many would go further and maintain that something would be wrong with me if I did not sense and express racial pride, racial kinship, racial patriotism, racial loyalty, racial solidarity, synonymous for that amalgam of belief, intuition, and commitment that manifests itself when blacks treat blacks with more solicitude than they do those who are not black. Some conduct animated by these sentiments has blended into the black background of daily routine, as when blacks who are strangers nonetheless speak to each other, hello, hey, yo, or hug, give each other a soul handshake, or refer to each other as brother or sister. Other manifestations are more dramatic. For example, the Million Man March, which brought at least 500,000 black men to Washington, D.C. in 1995, was a demonstration predicated on the notion that blackness gives rise to racial obligation and that black people should have a special, closer, more affectionate relationship with their fellow blacks than with others in America's diverse society. I reject this response to the question. Neither racial pride nor racial kinship offers guidance that is intellectually, morally, or politically satisfactory. Racial pride. I eschew racial pride because of my conception of what should be the object of pride for an individual, something that he or she has accomplished. I can feel pride in a good deed I've done or a good effort I have made. I cannot feel pride in some state of affairs that is independent of my contribution to it. The color of my skin, the width of my nose, the texture of my hair, and the various other signs that prompt people to label me black constitute such state of affairs. I did not achieve my racial designation. It was something I inherited, like my nationality and socioeconomic starting place and sex, and therefore something I should not feel proud of or be credited with. In taking this position, I follow Frederick Douglass, the great 19th century reformer, who declared, the only excuse for pride in individuals is in the fact of their own achievements. If the sun has created curly hair and tan skin, Douglass observed, let the sun be proud of his achievement. It is understandable why people have made inherited group status an honorific credential. Personal achievement is difficult to attain, and the lack of it leaves a vacuum of racial pride can easily fill. Thus, even if a person has little to show for himself, racial pride gives him status. But maybe I'm misconstruing what people mean by racial pride. Perhaps it simply means that no one is ashamed of one's race. To that, I have no objection. No one should be ashamed of labeling by which he or she is categorized, because no one chooses her parents or the signs by which society describes and sorts people. For this very same reason, no one should congratulate herself or herself on her race insofar as it is merely an accident of birth. I suspect, however, that when most black people embrace the term racial pride, they mean more than that they are unembarrassed by their race. They mean, echoing Marcus Garvey, who was a government agent, that to be black is no disgrace but an honor. Thus, when James Brown sings "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," he is heard by many blacks as expressing not just the absence of shame, but delight and assertiveness in valuing a racial designation that has long been stigmatized in America. There's an important virtue in this assertion of the value of black life. It combats still eminently in need of challenge the assumption that because of their race, black people are stupid, ugly, and low, and that because of their race, white people are smart, beautiful, and righteous. But within some of the forms of this assertiveness has taken are important vices, including the belief that because of racial kinship, blacks ought to value blacks highly than others. Racial kinship. I reject the notion of racial kinship. I do so in order to avoid its burdens and to be free to claim what distinguished political theorist Michael Sandel labels the unencumbered self. The unencumbered self is free and independent. The unencumbered by aims and attachment, it does not choose for itself. Sandel writes, free from the sanction of custom and tradition and an inherited status, unbound by moral ties, antecedent to choice, the self is installed as sovereign, cast as the author of the only obligations that constrain. Sandel believes that the unencumbered self is an illusion and that the yearning for it is a manifestation of shallow liberalism that cannot account for certain moral and political obligations that we commonly recognize, even prize. Obligations of solidarity, religious duties, and other moral ties that many claim us for reasons unrelated to a choice, which are indispensable aspects of our moral and political experience. Sandel's objection to those who, like me, seek the unencumbered self is that they fail to appreciate loyalties and responsibilities that should be accorded moral force parties because they influence our identity such that living by these attachments is inseparable from understanding ourselves as the particular reasons we are as members of this family or city or nation or people as bearers of that history. And it says, analogizing race to family is a potent rhetorical move used to challenge those who, like me, are animated by liberal, individualistic, and universalistic ethos that is skeptical of, if not hostile to, the particularisms, national, ethnic, religious, and racial, that seem to grow so strong recently, even in arenas such as major cosmopolitan universities where one might have expected their demise. The central point of the challenge is to suggest that the norms I embrace will, or at least should, wobble and collapse in the face of family loyalty. Blood, as they say, is thicker than water. Now, however, I do not want to rest my argument here. Rather, I want to accept the race-family analogy in order to strengthen my attack on assumptions that privileged status-driven loyalties, the loyalties of blood, over chosen loyalties, loyalties of will. In my view, Many people, including legislators and judges, make far too much of blood ties and derogation of ties created by loving effort. It says, a vivid illustration is provided by the following kind of child custody decision. It involves a child who has been separated from her parents and placed with adults who assume the role of foster parents. These adults nurture her, come to love her, and ultimately seek legally to become her new parents. If the blood parents of the child do not interfere, the foster parents will have a good chance of doing this. If, however, the blood parents say they want their child back, authorities in many jurisdictions will privilege the blood connection and return the child, even if the initial separation was mainly attributable to the fault of the blood parents, even if the child has been with the foster parents for a long time and is prospering under their care, even if the child views the foster parents as their parents and wants to stay with them, even if there's good reason to believe that the foster parents will provide a more secure home setting than the child's blood parents. Judges make such rulings in part because they reflect the idolatry of blood, which is an ideological cousin to the racial beliefs, I suppose. All right. Am I saying that morally blood ties are insufficient, indeed bad, basis for preferring one's genetic relatives to others? Yes, I'll rightly give the one life jacket on the sinking ship to my mother as opposed to your mother, because I love my mother, or at least I love her more than yours. I love my mother, however, not because of a genetic tie, but because over time she's done countless things that make me want to love her. She took care of me when I could not take care of myself. She encouraged me. She provided for my future by taking me to the doctor when appropriate, disciplining me, giving me advice, paying for my education. I love her too, because of qualities I have seen her exhibit in interactions with others. My father, my brother, my sister, neighbors, colleagues, and adversaries. The biological connection helped create the framework in which I have been able to see and experience her lovable qualities. But it is deeds, not blood, doing, not being, that is the morally appropriate basis for my preference for my mother over all other mothers in the world. Solidarity with Viola Liuzzo. Some contend that doing is what lies at the foundation of black racial kinship, that the reason one should feel morally compelled by virtue of one's blackness to have and show racial solidarity towards other blacks is that preceding generations of black people did things animated by racial loyalty which would now benefit all black people. These advocates would contend that the benefits bestowed, for instance, the Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and affirmative action programs impose upon blacks correlative racial obligations. That is what many are getting at when they say that all blacks, but particularly affluent ones, have a racial obligation to give back to the community. I agree that one should be grateful for those who have raised struggles for racial justice, sometimes a tremendous sacrifice. But why should my gratitude be racially bounded? Elijah Lovejoy, a white man murdered in Alton, Illinois in 1837 for advocating the abolition of slavery, participated just as fervently in that great crusade just as any person of my hue. The same could be said of scores of other white abolitionists. Coming closer to our time, not only courageous black people, but such as Medgar Evers, Vernon Dahmer, and James Chaney fought white supremacy in the shadow of death during the struggle for civil rights in the Deep South. White people like James Reed, Viola Liuzzo were there too, as were Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwimmer. Against this history, I see no reason why paying homage to the struggle for racial justice and endeavoring to continue that struggle must entail any sort of racially stratified loyalty. Indeed, this history suggests the opposite. So, let's see. I'm gonna read some other parts of this because it's quite long, or whatever. And I just want to bring out that these really good points or whatever. And I'm going to read some comments that was left or whatever. Concerning this matter or whatever. It says our problems. The distinction is significant. For one thing, under the rationale of giving priority of attention to those most in need, no racial boundary insulates professors from the obligation to attend to whatever maldistributions of mentorship they are in a position to correct. White professors are at least as morally obligated to address the problem as are black or other professors. All right. This is a point with ramifications that reach far beyond university. For it is said, with increasing urgency and by increasing numbers of people, that the various social difficulties confronting Black Americans are for reasons of racial kinship. The more responsibility of blacks, particularly those who have attained some degree of affluence, this view should be rejected. The difficulties that proportionally afflict Black Americans are not black problems, whose solutions are the social responsibility of black people. They are our problems. And their solution or amelioration is the responsibility of us all, irrespective of race. That is why it is proper to object when white politicians use the term "you people" to refer to blacks. This happened when Ross Perot addressed the NAACP annual convention during the 1992 presidential election. Many of those who objected to Perot's reference to "you people," however, turned right around and referred to blacks as "our people," therefore replicating the racial boundary setting they had just denounced. Isn't that something? Now, moreover, at long last, blacks have sufficient power to raise urgent concerns regarding the abuse of it. Now, in enough circumstances to make the matter worth discussing, blacks are positioned to exploit their potential racial power effectively. Hence, black attorneys wonder whether they should seek to elicit the racial loyalties of black jurors or judges on behalf of their clients. Black jurors and judges face the question of whether they should respond to such appeals. Black professors face the question of whether racial loyalty would shape the extent of which they make themselves available to their students. Black employers or personnel directors face the question of whether racial loyalties should shape their hiring decisions. Were blacks wholly bereft of power, as some commentators erroneously assert, these and similar questions would not arise. Thus, I evaluate arguments in favor of exempting blacks from the same standards imposed upon whites and conclude that typically, though perhaps not always, such arguments amount to little more than an elaborate camouflage for self-promotion or group promotion. So, beyond racial loyalty, I anticipate that some will counter that this is what is happening, has happened, and will always happen, and that the best that blacks can expect is what they are able to exact from white power structure through hard bargaining. In this view, racial unity, racial loyalty, racial solidarity, racial kinship, whatever one wants to call it, is absolutely essential for obtaining the best deal available. Therefore, in this view, my thesis is anathema, the foolhardy idealism, a plan for ruination, a plea for unilateral disarmament by blacks in the face of a well-armed foe with a long history of bad intentions. This challenge raises large issues that cannot be exhaustively dealt with here, but I should like to conclude by suggesting the beginning of a response based on two observations. First, it is noteworthy that those who have ostensibly asserted the imperatives of black solidarity, I think here particularly of Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, and Louis Farrakhan, are also those who have engaged in the most divisive, destructive, and merciless attacks on brothers and sisters who wish to follow a different path. Guys like me. My objection to the claims of racial pride and kinship stems in part from my fears of the effect on interracial relations, but it stems also in a large part from my fears on the stultifying effect on intra-racial relations. Racial pride and kinship seems to often stunt intellectual independence. If racial loyalty is deemed essential for and morally virtuous, then a black person's adoption of positions that are deemed racially disloyal will be seen by racial loyalists as a supremely threatening sin, one warranting the harsh punishments that have been historically visited upon alleged traitors. Second, if one looks at the amoral efforts by activists to overcome racial oppression in the United States, one finds people who yearn for justice, not merely for the advancement of a particular racial group. One finds people who do not replicate the racial alienations of the larger society, but instead welcome interracial intimacy of the most profound sorts. One finds people who are not content to accept the categories of communal affiliation they have inherited, but instead insist upon bringing into being new and better forms of communal affiliation, which love and loyalty are unbounded by race. I think here of Wendell Phillips and certain sectors of the abolitionist movement. I also think of James Farmer in the early years of the Congress of Racial Equality, and John Lewis in the early years of the Student Nonviolent Coordinator Committee. My favorite champion of this ethos, however, is a person I quoted at the beginning of this article, a person who the sociologist Orlando Patterson aptly describes as undoubtedly the most articulate former slave who has ever lived, a person whose words I would like to end. Frederick Douglass literally bore on his back the stigma of racial oppression. Speaking in June of 1863, only 5 months after the Emancipation Proclamation and before the complete abolition of slavery, Douglass gave a talk titled "The Present and Future of the Colored Race in America," in which he asked whether the white and colored people of this country can be blended into a common nationality and enjoy together under the same flag the inestimable blessings of life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness as neighborly citizens of a common country. He answered, "I believe they can. I too believe we can, if we are willing to reconsider and reconstruct the basis of our feelings of pride and kinship." It's a long article. I had to skip over quite a bit of it, but if you want the article in its entirety, I'll be more than happy to email it to you, your PDF file. Just leave it in the just leave it in the comment section. Hey, email it to me, or if you know how I can attach the PDF file to this video in the comment section, tell me how to do that, and I could do it that way. Okay, now I'm going to look at some comments that was randomly left on some videos concerning this whole black separatism crap and pro-blackness and all of the other bullshit. This comment was by A Lovely Time. She says, this strengthening of black identity in reaction to oppression based on their very blackness evolved into the civil rights movement, which established codified rights and helped expose race-based oppression to be understood as the stupidity it is. This helped blacks and whites evolve in intelligence. Racial pride seems to be a natural reaction to racial oppression and can, though not always, has led to a clearer understanding of the oneness of the human species. Chai 2251 wrote, "The U.S. is a nation of individuals. Take this point of view and you'll be less disappointed by your own people mean mugging you." To Ferry Toure, he writes, "Separate from niggas. I have. Fuck these niggas, their nigga bitches, and their nigga kids." I couldn't agree with you more, Teferi. F.K. Williams writes, "Stay focused, my bro, because race is for broke, poor people. The wealthy focus on networks and affluence alliances, i.e., what you experienced with Samantha. You notice it's usually the poor, broke motherfuckers that usually talk about race and everything. Meanwhile, the people that are rich and affluent and everything like that, they'll deal with anybody because, see, that's money. So you know you niggas still talking about that group economics, you gonna be left be fucking high. Mosaic Monk writes, you can't help black folks, not gonna happen. Too much social media influence to be ignorant. Okay, Stevie Mack writes, you can't save everyone. Loyalty isn't ingrained into this divided community anymore. And it's come to the point that separation is probably the best option for us all. It's over. All skin folk and kinfolk. And this comment really made my days, by James Porter. And it's like whenever you get something or whenever you receive a blessing or you come up in life, you have to get away from niggas. And James Porter writes, sad. That's why it seems like an impossible job for black communities to overcome poverty and flourish, because the affluent black population will be looked upon as food or a come up. And that's so right. Once you become successful and get money, you got to get away from niggas. Mark Thompson writes, I don't think it's anyone's job to save a hood that does not belong to you. It's really impossible to make a change like that is already destroyed and attached to decades of trauma. We need new examples like utilizing land and building your own community with schools, healthcare centers under full control street with names that represent us and not our oppressors, monuments of our people. That your children could resonate with all that matters. You're going to the hood and buying property and build homes that majority of the people are not ready for, like you said. Don't nobody give a fuck about the environment, not to mention it ain't they shit, and everybody around them is working against them. It's nothing to appreciate in the hood. The best thing to do is get out. They don't even know you or what you're doing. So when they see you, of course, you're going to be misperceived. Only nigga coming to the hood with a Rolex is a dope boy. Minority of the time. I rarely see. It's usually the grower. It's rarely the seed. It's usually the grower or the soil. And let's see here. This is for Flyno, and he had made a comment about these old Hotep pro-black niggas. And he writes, I had a back and forth with a Hotep and a white supremacist. And when people pointed out that to the Hotep that he's betraying his own people with his beliefs, going back to Africa and forming a black ethno-state, the white supremacists swooped in and said that we're just using Idpal and we're mad because the Hotep was thinking for himself, unlike other slack-jawed blacks. Like, seriously? The amount of delusion to think this way, not seeing any hypocrisy whatsoever, is astounding. They hate each other so much they're working together to be segregated. Absolute brain poison. All right, it says, damn it, Bobby, thank you. It's disgusting how prevalent this ideology is in the black community. Obviously not the same power dynamic as white supremacy, but still toxic behavior that perpetuates fascist ideology. All right, this is for Chesley Overstreet. I've watched a couple of my black friends get sucked into this Hotep line of thinking since the riot started a couple years back. When I told them it's just black supremacy, they laughed. I was introduced to this line of thinking in prison when my cellie was a Muslim Brotherhood guy. He would go on forever with these crazy ideas. The weird thing was the white guys were saying the same shit but reversed. Right out of a David Duke book. I find it strange that people find this line of thinking okay, because black people can't be racist or supremacists nowadays. It says, this one is for Resonationify. On point, on every point, especially that last one. Hotep-style Afrocentrism seems like it's copying all the destructive mistakes we're supposed to have learned from studying Eurocentrism. Yes, that's true. And this was from the last Salafi. How could you forget the most obvious similarity? Ethno-states within America. The thesis of Tariq Nasheed's Hidden Colors was reservations for the native Washita Moors, not far removed from Jared Taylor and Richard Spencer's talking points. Wesley Kane, he writes, as a black man, I love hearing this. I've never dealt with racism in my life. Some of my closest friends I have in this life have been all other races. And you couldn't tell any of us that we aren't family. I've never been treated differently by any of their family members. If anything, they have treated me as one of their own. I've been privileged enough to go to private schools and colleges, and I can tell you my blackness has never precluded me from doing anything that I put my mind to. Blaming racism is so much easier than blaming yourself for being unable to have a vision and chase it. All love. And I hope all that read this have a blessed day. Yep, shout out to you, Wesley. All right. Let's see. This is King Des, and he writes, yup, Africa loves us so much they sat back for centuries and watched us endure the most egregious evils in the history of the world and did nothing to help whatsoever. They haven't shown any sympathy for what happened because we are not the same people. They have captured us and put us on the ships with no remorse. The African and the white liberal are basically the same entity. They'll smile on our face and act like they're with us, meanwhile plotting their downfall and destruction the whole time. And Anto writes, none of this would have happened if so-called black men traveling across the planet was kept as a clandestine movement rather than going mainstream. On top of making it female-centric rather than seeking for your freedom. That pro-black thing is a hustle and reinforces the false curse of Ham doctrine. All right. And this one was by Grand Canyon 2. And he writes, Dr. Umar Johnson is not fooling anybody. If I was on that podcast, I would have told him I'm not taking no responsibility for what other black folks did in their personal mating choices. You can yell and call me individuals all you want. And I guess this is a response to that bullshit that Umar Johnson saying it's our fault that black women make wrong choices. It says, the men on the podcast need to make their position known and stand on instead of trying to reason with Dr. Umar. You had mostly black women and some men in the comment section saying yes to Dr. Umar and saying the men on the panel don't understand, aka code word, y'all suckers need to shut up and take care of all the children. I'm willing to bet most of those that agree with Dr. Umar are single mothers and dudes with multiple baby mothers looking for a community bailout plan under the guise of some black unity. Very well said, Grand Canyon 2. Shout out to you. Elliot 5220 writes, people should put less emphasis on being black and more on being a good person. Race is a construct to separate and isolate people for power. Hitler did it in Germany. Be proud of who you are, but don't let yourself be defined by being black. Be defined by your character. What's more important, get in the world and do something. If you were being born mixed race, what would your life purpose be? Would you have no purpose? Ask Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or any mixed race person. Most Americans are mixed anyway. It's such a waste of time and energy to focus on race, yet we've had wars because of it. This is Kenneth Smith, 6367. Elliot is right. Why do black people suppose we're all believe that we're all supposed to live together, bunched together in some little box enclave? America is a meritocracy and communities are built on social economic compatibility. Join the rest of us in the post-civil rights era. Shout out to you, Kenneth Smith. Very well said. No need to say 7553. I have grown weary of black this and black that. Our ancestors fought and died to be inclusive in the society in which they live. There is no other race to empathize something like black owned. I worked with a supervisor that made $120,000 a year, and that is base salary that didn't include overtime, talking about how she's oppressed. As black people continue to pass on this oppressed mentality and continue to isolate ourselves from society, what do you think will be the next step? Very well said. Tamiko R. White writes, Dr. Umar Johnson is an old fool. He, like many foolish blacks, still believe in this black love utopia, which is outdated and certainly out of season. Why do I say that? Because it's 2023 and everything is interracial. And if you are black in 2023, you're still holding on to this skeet black love pipe dream, you're going to be left behind. You either move with the times or die alone. As a black woman, I fully support SYSBM Passport Brothers, and I support black female diversity because both groups have the God-given right to seek out love here or overseas, and that is their choice. I am a black woman and I have a U.S. passport and I travel and date out, and I see nothing wrong with that. You only live once, so make it work. Shout out to you, Tamiko Wright. Tamiko are white. Thank you for the compliment. Stockerton 3761 writes, for the love of God, just let people be with who they want to be with. Just because you date or marry someone white or of another race doesn't mean you hate your own. The best mate for you may not even be in the same race as you, and you cut off a lot of potential good mates for being so narrow-minded. And this is a good comment made by Lord Sinister 707 when these pro-black hotep niggas talking about, well, you need to come back to the community. And he writes, the main reason why so many black men don't want to build in a black community is actually very simple. It's because anything that a black man builds in a community, more often than not, gets disrespected by the same black folks he's trying to help. Moreover, black folks always try to undercut his bottom line with the help of brother sister Al. For example, didn't we have an incident where a black man had a huge, nice restaurant but was shamed when he told some black women to stop twerking and disturbing his other customers? I mean, are we not going to talk about the turkey leg hut incident where black folks were coming into the restaurant dressed completely inappropriately? Then in protest of the implemented dress code, a black woman literally walked into the restaurant stark naked, and then the people are defending her more than the black man and woman who owned the restaurant. That's why I say, fuck these niggas. And shout out to you, Lord Sinister. Lucky Skivvy 6077 writes, Umar and black and BWs are stuck in the 60s. Jedi Master Kevin Samuels woke Negroes up to the shame language. Black men never knew they had the freedom to opt out of the community's problems. Niggas are escaping the plantation left and right. And this is the one I definitely love when, you know, people, you know, these broke black niggas, you know, want to blame so-called integration when there was a lot of other stuff that caused the fall of the black community. And I'll read it. I think you forgot who was making the laws, who was controlling the country. Black people had it far worse back in the segregated time than none. Not only were the tax were mainly used in white neighborhoods, but also black people had less rights. Black people also hanged in trees. Segregation is never a good thing and never will be. There will be always a group of people that are controlling the country, and that group of people always will have all the privileges compared to the rest. Look at the state of South Africa and how segregated the country is. How the government gave way more opportunities to one group of people while left the other to survive by their own. Let's not even talk about land acquisition, getting a loan, selling a house, etc. And I agree with you there. Well, very well put. Now, this concludes this video. I know it's probably one of my longer videos, or whatnot. But there will be a part 2 where I go in on the white nationalists and white supremacist, white pride people. So stay tuned and have a great day. Stay tuned.